But besides that, a mediocre episode that no one really remembers, Season 2 is great. But then we get to Season 3. And that's when they whipped out the big guns.
This is not a bulldozer. This is not a fudgesicle. And how is this Ghostbusters 2?
Season 3 was when the Fairly OddParents was firing on all cylinders, going beyond the high expectations Season 2 left and producing hit after hit. The worlds of Dimmsdale and Fairyworld were fleshed out enough for any possible adventure, each character was at the top of their game, and the animation was finally as good as it could get. That's enough mindless raving. I think I should explain myself now. The amount of good episodes here is nuts. They did it. They got an even bigger order of episodes, 19.5 hours, and they could still fit the quota and then some. That's impressive. And while world building wasn't this season's biggest strength, what they did with their pre-established characters was admirable. Butch went on his own adventures when Timmy wished in several new jobs, Chester and AJ got their own working for the school newspaper, and Vicky actually started to like Timmy when they were trapped in snow. And it's not like this took time away from Timmy, Cosmo and Wanda. They had as much screen time as ever. But I was really happy to see the rest of them come to life and stay funny. It's telling how loved the cast was at this point when there were only 2 new characters introduced. The Tooth Fairy, who like Wandissimo is fan service but goes out with Jorgen for some reason, and Timmy's old imaginary friend Gary, who turns on him, who was a pretty good foil to him. That's not to say all character growth here was good. As consistently good as Chester and AJ stayed, their voices were replaced, and it was very noticeable at first, since the new actors hardly tried to sound like the old ones. But I got over it eventually, puberty happens to the best of us. Additionally, Trixie's rare moments of care towards Timmy were becoming non-existent now. But I don't see this as a deal breaker. She still works as a part of the snobbish upper class of her school, but she's becoming a far less realistic goal for Timmy now. But what was a realistic goal for the show's crew was the art style finally being perfected. They were more liberal with shading, which gives a show with designs this basic some much needed depth, and this is a very minor thing, but Timmy's eyebrows were also darker, so I guess they finally figured out how they wanted to draw him. Now that's a good thing to think about 3 seasons in. Perhaps the biggest change in Season 3 was the introduction of TV movies. Most other cartoons are sparing with them, usually reserving them for the end of the show, but the Fairly OddParents used them to just go all out with the biggest, most epic stories they could imagine, starting here with Abracatastrophe. Let me just say that it's the weakest of the classic era's TV movies, but it's still really good. Sure, the plotting is kinda messy and the amount of tension is so overwhelming it's ridiculous, but I can forgive that because it looks good, it sounds good, and it was a gamble that paid off big time. But with that said, what were some of my favorite episodes this year? We'll start things off right with Shiny Teeth, in which Chip Skylark's teeth are stolen by the evil dentist character that I neglected to mention because he's played by Gilbert Gottfried. That tells you all you need to know. But he works here as a villain, and the victorious Shiny Teeth song is really, really good. So Totally Spaced Out is one of the weirdest episodes they ever made, about the Yugopotamians being scared of this race of bunny toys because of how cute they are. It only gets stranger from there, and it was the most a Space Out episode made me laugh in all honesty. Movie Magic, I can see people shrugging off as a pop culture reference fest, but I felt they always fit the Fairly OddParents better than other shows, so I don't mind them, or their implementation into this story. I get the same sort of feeling with Engine Blocked. I don't know that much about cars, but I know that Timmy wishing himself into a car and Vicky stealing it can be a riot. Throw in some more Doug Dimmadome and you're golden. Once again, the best episode of the season was about time travel, and here it was the secret origin of Denzel Crocker. In it, Timmy goes back through Mr. Crocker's life to see when he got so bitter and crazy, and what he discovers is a brilliant twist that puts the rest of the show into a much greater, more meaningful context. You know now what's at stake for Timmy when he goes on these adventures, and what'll happen if he fails to follow the rules. But let's go back to having fun now. Pipe Down was more than deserving of one of the series' Emmy wins, because it's just fantastically made. Timmy wishes for a world without sound, and all that's left to convey the plot is reactions, silly music, and charades. It's brilliant, and one of the funniest cartoons I've ever watched. Finally, I just found Snowbound to be a sigh of relief for me since it's about Vicky and Timmy being stuck in a snowy cave and needing to work together to survive, which makes it one of a kind. And I also found the subplot of Butch trying to find an abominable snowman while Brotown just relaxes at a ski lodge to be great too. I think if there's one downside to Season 3, it would have to be the Valentine's Day special Love Struck. I only now realize how much cartoons usually screw this holiday up. But this one's about Timmy wishing that men and women were completely separated, which causes problems for Cupid, but a big focus is put on how the ladies have created a utopian society on their own, while the guys devolve into gross testosterone-addicted idiots. In the context of a cartoon episode from 2003 teaching kids that their opposite gender needs them, it's fine if a little annoying, but the mere concept of gender roles is becoming more controversial. I'll stop it there and just say it's a dumb episode made 2 decades ago, but your opinion on it will depend on your views on gender, romance, and Tara Strong screaming for 10 seconds. But with Season 3 being my favourite of the show, that means Season 4 is way worse, right? Oh, hardly.
Every time there's something cool in my life, every time, Vicky ruins it! And I'm not gonna let her ruin anything else!
It was honestly a tough call between this and 3, but there were some things about Season 4 that bothered me. Not a lot, but we should start with what got even better. World building became a more pressing focus again, with more villains being introduced in the form of the Pixies, who want to take over Fairy World and make it slow and boring. And they're all voiced by Ben Stein, who, if you don't know, has this deep, monotonous voice. Which adds to the joke, sure, but means they aren't too funny for too long. Good thing they made them serious sometimes though. You also see the debut of Norm the Genie, a slimy con artist of a genie who always grants wishes with a catch, and he always just nails it, even when they replace his voice later on. He fits Butch Hartman's writing style and personality so well. Catman also hits the scene, and most of his role is just Adam West being Adam West. Pretty acceptable since this is a very superhero-heavy season, with no less than 6 episodes starring him, the Crimson Chin, the Power Pals, or Crash Nebula from that unsuccessful backdoor pilot that was very bland and forgettable, and I personally don't count it as a Fairly OddParents episode. On the subject of space, Mark Chang moves from Yugopatamia to Earth to escape an arranged marriage. That's neat. I don't know if it's because the writers wanted more Mark or less Mark, but it's a peculiar change nevertheless. But there's one more character who joins the huge cast, Jimmy Neutron. Yes, this is the season in which the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour aired, in which Jimmy Neutron and Timmy Turner switched places and art styles. The multi-dimensional hullabaloo and the grand scale of both misadventures propels it above so many other cartoon crossovers, and I have to say, I had an overall better experience watching this in the context of the Fairly OddParents than I did the adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, dated CGI notwithstanding. That could just be my bias though, since I think Jimmy Neutron's a better show than classic Fairly OddParents, but one controversial opinion at a time here. So let's get straight to another. I don't think Channel Chasers is the best TV movie, best episode, or even in the top 10, and I don't think it's the perfect series finale. However, I like the TV parodies, Alec Baldwin's great as Timmy's dystopian future self, and with Timmy needing to come to terms with needing to grow up someday and lose his godparents naturally, I can't deny that's a good mature moral to base a TV movie around. I just wish the resolution wasn't about Timmy needing Vicky to make him miserable, and his adult self inflicting the same misery on his own children with a robot Vicky, but everything else is great. It's a smart story through and through, told mostly pretty well. And here are some other great episodes to come from this season, starting with Mind Over Magic. It's a fun mind-reading story up until Crocker's plan to torture Timmy by making the other kids think of random stuff. It's so silly and dark and comes at just the right time. It makes the episode for me. And according to Parenthoods, Butch and Brotown have evil doppelgangers who only now, on their trip to Canada, get them framed for stealing. I know, it's absurd, they're in Canada. What's even more absurd is the big superhero wish, where virtually every character becomes either a superhero or a supervillain, and they're all used efficiently, even the tertiary kids like Sanjay and Elmer. Emotion Commotion was another great one that makes me happy every time I watch it. Ironically, since it's about Timmy wishing his emotions away and risking danger at every corner, while staying completely nonplussed. It substitutes the show's usual subversive humor with an ironic one, and it's such a welcome presence. The Jimmy Timmy Power Hour and Channel Chasers are both great movies that belong with the good, but my favorite for the whole series was School's Out the Musical. The Pixies have initiated a master plan to use a clown they've raised for years to make Timmy wish kids ruled the earth so they won't need godparents anymore. It's a wild ride with a crazy amount of valid twists and turns and brilliant song numbers. Just when I thought the Fairly OddParents couldn't get any better, they make this wallop of a movie. That's not to say season 4 was always this amazing. In fact, it had the first crop of episodes that I outright hated. Miss Dimmsdale, the beauty pageant episode, isn't exactly one of them, but it wasn't really good at all. It doesn't have any staying power. All I remember is Vicky abusing her power or something, and Butch trying to prove that a man can be Miss Dimmsdale, which they probably can, but he was just being a real jerk about it. A bad case of diarrhea did the impossible and made me feel sorry for Vicky though, because Timmy and Wanda keep going through her diary and embarrassing her. Yes, Wanda's egging Timmy on, under the assumption that Vicky called her fat? Well, that's uncalled for, and so is all of Homewrecker. Vicky wrecks Timmy's house and blames him for it, and so his parents take him to Vicky's house where of course more needless destruction is going to take place. Property damage doesn't always get on my nerves, but when it's the focus, I get irritated. Lastly, Truth or Cosmo Quinces is about Cosmo lying his way through a fairy high school reunion, which is a jerkish thing to do, and Cosmo should be anything except a jerk. It doesn't fit him. And I also really hate the running gag of Timmy needing to whiz, because he's 10, and they put way too much pressure on him for me to be comfortable. I should reiterate that season 4 is good overall, one of the show's best, but you can tell some of that original magic was starting to dim slightly. Some of the writers were moving on to other shows now, including Butch Hartman himself. This was around the time his second show, Danny Phantom, started after all. It seemed the Fairly OddParents' days were numbered, but boy was everyone's predictions wrong. But back then, everyone expected it to have the life cycle of an average Nicktoon, maybe a few more years, then poof. That's why I think season 5 is a good stopping point for classic Fairly OddParents.
The lava's about to hit Vicky's house! We better stop it! Timmy? Hello? You're not gonna unwish this, are you?
Let me just say that of the pre-cancellation seasons, season 5 is the weakest. But that doesn't mean I find it to be bad at all. There just weren't that many interesting twists and turns compared to the previous 4 seasons, which each felt like a long sequel to one another. 5 is a lot more content with delivering standard Fairly OddParents fare, which is a waste since it's the longest season at 19 half-hour episodes plus the last 2 Jimmy Timmy Power Hours, which aren't quite as good as the first either. But enough complaining, what's changed? Well, Wanda's family is introduced, including her blonde sister who's a famous TV star creatively called Blonda, but I don't mind that at all. What I do mind is that her daddy's the leader of a trash mafia in Fairy World. I never asked for this. I also didn't ask for Remy to get Juan Decimo back, but I got it, and okay, those episodes were fine. At this point, the changes feel more superficial than anything, like they're not really adding anything to the show the same way season 2 and 3's changes did. But that's not an issue, this is still a good season for the most part, and the standard episodes are still rather funny and creative. But on to the specials, the second Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, When Nerds Collide, is good for what it is, letting more characters cross over from Dimmsdale to Retroville and vice versa, but the CGI on everyone other than Timmy has really shown its age, and I don't like Cindy Vortex getting Jimmy and Timmy to fight over her. It doesn't feel right for her at this point in her own show. The third one, The Jerkinators, I think was a bit better. I really like how Jimmy and Timmy are starting to become good pals now, but at the expense of their friends, that's a unique conflict. I also really like Shirley, the villain they end up creating, who has a delightfully tragic backstory about how he too was ignored by them. And I could go on and on about how cool all the little details were, but I'll leave it at, if both shows ended here, as was originally planned, I'd be okay with that. But to me, classic Fairly OddParents' finale will always be Fairy Idol. Another really good TV movie. They were just on fire. Norm the Genie devises a plan to become a fairy by making Cosmo and Wanda hate Timmy and retire, yada yada misunderstanding with a clone, and participate in a fairy version of American Idol to become an official fairy godparent. And to Chester, who's the latest sucker to find him. It's a fairly involved plot that delves into how much Timmy wants his godparents now that they're gone, Cosmo and Wanda reconsidering retirement, and Chester having to deal with Norm's backhanded wishes and blaming himself for them. It's not the best of the movies, there are some real stretches here and there, but all the glue holding it together, like the character growth and the songs, make it a worthy stopping point. This is the closest Timmy gets to losing his godparents after all, the stakes can't get much higher than this. But there are some better episodes in season 5 that kept the show fun to watch by themselves. Blonders Have More Fun was a clever way to introduce Blonda by having her and Wanda switch places and see how each other's lives aren't what they're cracked up to be. It's a cliche, but it was used really well. And Escape from Unwish Island was another really fun, exciting adventure with a lot of great callbacks popping up on Unwish Island. Yes, this has the grand return of Super Toilet. I think Hassle in the Castle, I think you have to say it, was the most serious episode of the season, as Timmy discovers more god kids that Cosmo and Wanda had before him, including the evil ones, one of which started World War I. Okay, but Presto Changer was just hilarious. Through a series of mischanges, Timmy and Crocker swap bodies, and Crocker's race home to prove the existence of his own fairy godparents is amazing. And even better, Cosmo and Wanda are away taking care of Mama Cosma, while she has an illness that makes her like Wanda. It's about time those two birds were stoned. The last standard episode I really liked was The Good Old Days, a send-up to Disney and Fleischer cartoons from the early 30s when everything was a lot sillier, but also a bit edgier than today. As a fan of those old-timey, early Golden Age cartoons, this was a treat. But Season 5 had some episodes that were, without a doubt, the worst up to that point. Timmy's 2D House of Horror was just a bunch of annoying yelling, characters acting stupid, and gross-out humor, which almost never fits the Butch Hartman style. And neither does saying everyone's better off without you. Yup, my least favorite episode of the original run is It's a Wishful Life. Because I can see it being an okay Wonderful Life send-up if they cut back on 3 things. Jorgen being a sociopath trying to get a 10-year-old to die, that 10-year-old seriously contemplating giving up on life, and the reason for that being that everyone he knows would be a lot happier if he was never born, instead of the opposite like in good Wonderful Life parodies. As it stands, it's just awful, and the only thing in his whole life that Butch Hartman has apologized for damn good reason. You also really can't sympathize with Jorgen in Teeth for 2, where the Tooth Fairy breaks up with him for trying to steal Timmy's teeth, and he becomes a sobbing wreck who sleeps in Timmy's treehouse. That's not fun, and their eventual marriage isn't deserved. Talkin' Trash was pretty lame too. It's got more gross out and very useless cartoony madness, the kind that feels like it's talking down to you instead of entertaining you. Moving Day wasn't that good either. How do you make a story about a community village that brainwashes people into staying with evil milk? The answer is you don't. That's stupid, and I wasn't scared or humoured by it. The last pre-cancellation episode I didn't like at all was Smart Attack, which starts with a typical wish to make Butch smarter, but that also means he's more willing to take his son's pet goldfish, the godparents, and plan to dissect them. It annoys me how he gets smarter but less considerate of his son's feelings for the most time as an Einstein. It's a terrible smart episode cliche. But after that, the rest of the season's run was perfectly tolerable to great, and if you consider the first 5 seasons the only canon ones, then you can say it ended at the right time, or at least should've. Right now, having not seen that many of the later episodes, I can say that I like pretty much most of what this show had to offer at the beginning. It wasn't just a sharp, timeless string of cautionary tales about being careful what you wish for, it was a likeable, well-developed world that I fell right back into whenever I turned it on again. The main characters were great, the side characters were great too, and all the different ways it presented the worth of its own magic was constantly surprising. If I had a viewing recommendation, it'd be just Season 1 to 5, and the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours if you like Jimmy Neutron too. You'll be just as satisfied as I was, if you couldn't tell by the overall very positive tone of this video. But to come back to the real world for a second, I know that Seasons 9 and 10, and to an extent 6 to 8, have badly affected the Fairly OddParents legacy, and that the franchise's reputation has suffered greatly over the past decade. I have no idea when I'll cover those seasons, but let me just say, if you stick to the classic run, you'll never need to make a wish again. Goodbye for now.
You're watching Disney Channel.